Shaliza Sundays on 105.9 The Region.
I'm Shaliza Bacchus, and you're listening to 105.9 The Region. This is Shaliza Sundays. Thanks so much for tuning in. And it's time now for another Artist Spotlight Sunday. The month of June is National Indigenous History Month, and we've got an artist, a Métis artist, I should say, who goes by the name of Eric Jackson. And he recently released a song with the Willow River Band, and it's called Birds of Prey. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Hey, it's good. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So tell me the story behind this song called Birds of Prey.
Yeah, so the last few years, my partner and I have been reconnecting with our Indigenous heritage. We're both Métis, so we were both raised not super immersed in our culture. So over the last couple of years, obviously there's been a lot in the news around residential schools and the 60s scoop and the mistreatment of Indigenous peoples. So we've, through our community, been exposed to a lot of stories from some survivors and ancestors of survivors that have shared their stories with us around their mistreatment, some that were actually in residential schools themselves. And so I wanted to put all of those stories into a song that kind of summarizes the pain that Indigenous people feel on a daily basis when having to hear about all of these children being found at residential schools and talking about land back initiatives and things like that. So that's how the song came to be. It was trying to remain as true to those stories as I could.
I love the message that you're trying to put out. Like for me personally, I just feel like I am super passionate about the whole residential school thing. And I think it's a little ridiculous, honestly, that attention's only really being brought to it now. So what kind of response have you been getting from the song? You know, a lot of people didn't know about these issues before, which is a conversation for another day.
Yeah, the response has been very positive. I actually shared it, an early demo version of it, with some of the elders and other people in the community I'm a part of, that some of their stories were referenced in the song to make sure that I was getting it right, because I was just kind of the channel, right? It wasn't really my personal story. And the response was very positive. I've heard that it's very accurate, that it captures the emotion perfectly. The emotion both of sadness and also a little bit of frustration, right? Of still having to be dealing with these issues.
Yes, of course. And that's exactly what you're going for. And you mentioned that you were reconnecting with your heritage. How did you disconnect, if you don't mind my asking?
So, as I mentioned, I'm Métis, so half of my family are European settlers, and then the other half has Indigenous peoples. And so I was predominantly raised in a pretty white community, right? Celebrating Christmas and all these different white holidays, if you will, right? So I never really had much exposure to the Indigenous side of my family. And when my parents split up, I kind of lost a bit of connection with that side of the family. So it became important to me over the last few years, especially as my partner and I were planning to start the adoption process and potentially have Indigenous children in our care, that we were going to be able to be connected to the community, not only for ourselves, but for any potential children that we may have.
Oh, that's such a great story. That really is. And what have been like the main takeaways that you've come across, trying to reconnect with your heritage?
The biggest thing for me, a couple things really, is the importance of the culture being preserved, making sure that there are spaces for youth and for adults like myself that maybe have been disconnected to be able to go and not feel judged that they don't know a whole lot, right? Being able to learn more about the culture, whether it be ceremony or drum circles and things like that. And then the other thing, the importance of having space for that to be provided, having land that is given back to the Indigenous community so that these types of experiences can continue to happen.
Yeah, and with that being said, what do you think is the best way for maybe youth to get in touch, even if they're not necessarily of Indigenous culture? They just want to learn about the heritage, learn about the culture and the culture that was lost, really.
I think the biggest thing, there's a lot of self-education that needs to happen. Like there's a lot of, Google it can be your best friend, right? Start looking for ways that you can educate yourself on the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada. But then also looking at, there's a lot of social media groups, a lot of Facebook groups. There's land back initiatives out of Brantford, out of Kitchener-Waterloo. And there's a lot of resources posted in those channels for where you can learn about the history, where you can see community events and things like that.
1059 The Region.